Thank you. Thanks very much, Julie. I really appreciate the introduction. This is fantastic. I guess I'm here today because this is one of the really important initiatives for the government in the context of the New South Wales Ageing Strategy. And we're really pleased to have been able to find some money to put behind this to run the grant scheme that we'll come to at the end of this session. A few of us have been working on this for 3-4 months, Margaret, something like that, which actually isn't that long when you think about it. But I think James and Margaret and we've got people from the Division of Local Government here as well. Have been working on this program, for several months, trying to get us to this point. So I think for those of us who've been trying to nut it out, it's really exciting to have so many people here from across the state interested in this scheme and really interested in doing some great work around the ageing of the population. What I wanted to do today was a couple of things. One was just to give you a bit of a context as to why it is that the government put money into this scheme and really broadly what it is we're trying to achieve. And then to finish this with a bit more sort of technical stuff about what actually the grant scheme looks like, what we'll fund and dollar items and some of those kind of things. But I think it was probably important to kind of start with what the whole sort of point and the whole purpose was in terms of, from the government's perspective. That works. That's nice, isn't it? Look, as I said, this is one of the initiatives of the New South Wales Ageing Strategy. I think there are copies lying around there for people who may not have one. Please feel free to take it home and tell your friends about it. This is the government's new policy statement around population ageing. And this is really, I guess, the government's vision, as is on the slide there. I guess this is grounded in what is the good news. There is a lot of very good news in this area. The best bit of the good news is if I look around this audience, I think all of you on average, absolutely, probably more than, all of you on average are going to, live another 2 or 3 years than you might have expected to 10 years ago at the end of your life. So someone who lives 65 today, how many women, the women here, you can expect to get to 65 and to live for, for another 20 years after that. And the vast majority of that time, you're going to be fit and healthy and not really in need of a whole lot of care services. Now, that's fantastic. For the men in the room, I can't give you quite the same good news. I think for you, it's something like 18 years, but, feel free to pick your game up a bit and see if we can define it before we all get there. But again, most of that are years of being fit and healthy. And in the last 10 years, we have, on average, as a society, added another 2 years of fit and healthy living for older people in this country. And that's going to keep on happening. And I guess that was really where we started when we were trying to do this ageing policy. Living longer is a fantastic thing. We are all getting more time than our parents or our grandparents had before us, but is also a really major change around the way in which we live our lives and what we think of as being actually of old age. So I guess that's really the very big picture challenge that the strategy is trying to aim at, and that we really wanted to put some money on the table to encourage local government to think that through and respond to that and continue the great momentum that this sector has already been doing. So look, this first slide is really just a quick take out of the strategy. What the government's looking is for the people of New South Wales to experience the benefits of living longer. That means something for seniors, people who are already perhaps over the age of 65 or already in the broad kind of category of retirees, that they will be able to live active and rewarding lives as valued members of the community. It also means something for people in the middle of their lives, and we're very interested in this strategy about thinking about how we plan ahead. What does it mean for your communities about what's going to happen in 10 years' time, as opposed to just what has already happened now? And that last limb is really that New South Wales, as a whole, responds effectively to the challenges and the opportunities of population ageing. So look, I'm sure you've already seen some of these numbers, but I think some of this is kind of worth just remembering. This is what's happening in New South Wales as a whole. Now, you may have already had a few of these numbers this morning. I'm sorry I couldn't have been with you all day, but I think it's important just to kind of remember this. We are going to continue to expand substantially as a community, but let's look at that number of people aged 65 to 84. That's 800,000 additional people in that category between 2006 and 2036. Now, this data is a little bit old. We haven't quite done it for the 2011 census yet. I think there's probably a little bit more work we need to do fairly urgently on that to get it to you. But the story is going to stay the same. And that's the category of people who are going to be, in the main, fit, well, active, participating, walking around your neighbourhoods, volunteering in organisations, really kind of, the backbone and heavily involved in a lot of our communities. There's obviously also a huge percentage increase in that 85 plus, but actually a smaller real number. I think it's so, kind of important for us to remember here that there's kind of two stories running here. There is a story about people who will be really quite elderly and perhaps in need of a lot of services, but there is a lot more people coming through who are going to be well shy of that. I guess I've already spoken about the life expectancy stuff, but I guess that's some of those points I was raising before. Life expectancy here is rising, and that's a fantastic thing. I guess this was just some of the things we were thinking about, and I want to kind of talk a bit more about this in a moment, about what some of this might mean for local government. And I guess I wanted to put this up because these might be some of the kinds of questions you want to think about as you're thinking about what population ageing means for your council, for your communities, as you think about the kind of projects that you might be wanting to put in under this program. I think one of the things it means is there will be almost no regions in the state, probably the country as well, which will not have a significant increase in the number of people over 65. So I think probably gone are the days where we might once have thought about, some areas of the state being places where older people lived and some being places where families lived. Actually, every area in the state is going to be a place where quite a lot of older people live. Often, also with younger families or with, other demographics as well. But I think probably what is going on in ageing is now an issue that every council in every place needs to be thinking about, perhaps not just those areas that we traditionally thought of as retirement communities. You will all know this. I'm sure Catherine talked about this earlier today. I think this probably has really big implications to be thought through about how it is that people use public space. How it is we design, town centres, about what it is we try and co-locate so that people can maintain their independence, by getting to all of the places that they need to. It might mean that parks, community centres, all of those things are to a greater extent used by a whole range of demographics, and in some cases perhaps even largely used by older people. One of the things we're keen to keep exploring is that I think older people will continue to be a pretty strong economic and political force. One of the implications, I guess, of compulsory superannuation in this country for the last 20, 25 years is that there will be more older people with more money than we've had in previous generations. Now, that's not going to mean that every older person is rolling in it, not by a long way. But it does mean there'll be a higher proportion of, shall we say, cashed up older people who are interested in purchasing goods and services. Those of you in regional areas may, I'm sure, have already started thinking through what that means for the economic issues within your region, what it means for tourism, what it might mean for the infrastructure we need to create to, attract the potential spending power of older people. But similarly, I think, and perhaps as has always been the case, older people will be a particularly significant political voice in lots of councils as well. Having a say, needing to be very critically involved in the design of communities, in how development is shaped. Perhaps some of you can already think of examples where that may already be the case. I think we have a huge opportunity as a nation to be using older people's social capital. Volunteering rates among older people have always been really high, and in particular that kind of, group of people, 65 to 80-ish, who, are otherwise pretty well, are of course the backbone of lots of the organisations you would know and love. That will hopefully continue to be the case, but it will be interesting to think as each generation runs through whether older people will want to continue to be the backbone of the same organisations. How it is we want to kind of encourage people to think about that. What does it mean for sporting clubs, for various other organisations that older people may be interested in being part of? Housing and development assessments. I was having a very interesting conversation with my friend from Willoughby, whom I can't see at the moment, about the possible. There we are, right at the back. Thank you very much. About the potential implications about thinking about providing older people options in terms of being able to stay within their own communities, but move to more suitable housing, which is perhaps a bit more age accessible. Now, these are all big structural questions, not all of which are councils alone, but obviously councils are big players in that. And look, the last one, which we're also having a bit of a chat about down at the front table here with our friends from Hurstville, was I think probably lots of you are seeing generational change in older people's interests. One of the stories I get quite a lot when we got through the ageing strategy consultations was older people who are involved in organisations such as the University of the Third Age, newer organisations, perhaps reflecting the interests of, if you like, the baby boomer generation, kind of looking a little bit jealously over at the senior sit centres that were perhaps built for people 20 years earlier and thinking, geez, it'd be really nice if we could get into them and, you know, be able to run some of our sessions out of that. And, you know, I think probably we've been here before, that as each generation reaches older age, new community interests and organisations come up, and there's a transition issue about how it is we, you know, try and keep some of those things moving through in communities. It's not only about facilities, but that seemed to be a practical example. Look, I thought it was probably worth just pulling out a couple of little case studies. And look, we did this largely on the fact we knew there were some potential people in the room from some of these areas, but also just wanting to tell a couple of typical stories. I didn't manage to find our friend here from Penrith. We're up the back. If you feel like chipping in at some point, feel free. Don't feel obliged. But, you know, be very interested to hear what all this looks like for you. I guess I was thinking about Penrith as probably typical of lots of areas out in Western Sydney that at least I always typically think of as being perhaps family areas. Had I been born in Sydney, I suspect Penrith is probably one of the places my parents would have bought a house when I was a kid. But moving on some time, and I'm substantially older than I was then, I think what's really interesting is to see where the big growth is happening in a community like Penrith. So those numbers tell us a bit of a story, and they need to be updated for 2011. But again, you know, they tell us a bit of a story. That's a big number in the 65 pluses. So areas that we may once have thought of as kind of, you know, family communities are probably going to continue to be family communities, but will also be older people's communities. And I'm, you know, not sure what that might mean in terms of how we design town centres and transport links and, you know, where it is we need community facilities and who's using parks and all of the rest of it. Is there any other, have you got any better local insights, our friends from Penrith? Don't feel like you need to, but I...
What I've noticed is that there are less people leaving the region for a tree change or a sea change. So they're staying within their family environment and children are buying closer to parents. And so there's a need for that whole of family type of facility, whether it's a park or a community facility. We've got very old infrastructure, 20, 30 years old, that isn't flexible and adaptable to different user groups, and that's one of the gaps in infrastructure that we've got, and we've had really poor public transport.
Yep, all of which will, presumably the patterns of demand need to change. And I mean, certainly the transport issue is a really interesting one. What happens in terms of localised stuff? Demand for a bus route at, you know, 11 a.m. may well be very different in 10 years' time than it was 10 years ago. Yeah. So I guess, you know, we're keen to bring some of those issues up. I mean, I know public transport is an issue for, you know, for Transport for New South Wales, not necessarily for yourselves, but, you know, I guess some of those kind of really key structural issues are really important for us to understand. The next one we jumped at was Willoughby, our friend down the back. I guess I think of Willoughby as, you know, as a more established suburb. It's probably a LGA, like many of the areas on the, you know, the northern shore, the northern beaches, probably has had fairly significant numbers of older people for quite a long time. But that's going to continue. And again, it's interesting to see that growth number. You know, the largest growth number in Willoughby, at least according to these numbers, continues to be people over the age of 65, although some pretty consistent growth coming kind of for children and for younger adults and for slightly older adults as well. I don't know, are there any other great insights you have from Willoughby? We were having a bit of a chat about the interesting distinctions between the East and Chatswood. Yep. And look, that's a very, so I'm not sure everyone could hear that, but particularly thinking about housing options for people within their own community. It's really interesting when we did the ageing strategy. One of the things we heard a lot about from older people, in fact, far more than we heard about people interested in doing the sea change, tree change thing that a lot of people talk about, was if I'm going to move, I'm looking for something within a kilometre or two of where I currently live. Not even necessarily a particularly cheaper house, just a more age-appropriate one. Maybe a bit cheaper. And I think that probably has some real challenges for all of us and for lots of councils about what we think about when we think about particularly sort of lower level densification in town centres. I'm less thinking about, 15-storey towers, but perhaps what it might look in terms of, perhaps just some slightly greater densification in smaller town centres. That in fact the people who might be moving into those neighbourhoods may well be older people. That may be who we're building for. Not for kind of young singles or, newly marrieds or, a range of other populations. So I guess it's been a few years in various aspects in housing. It seemed to be not necessarily the discussion that people had when they speak about densification. So again, it might be the kind of thing that is relevant for your area, that perhaps some of the project work that you do here can kind of have that better understood for what it means for your local community. Where are we going next? Going up the coast, Port Macquarie, Hastings. Where's Julie? Was Julie? Yes, thank you. Right up the back. Thank you. So look, I think, Port Macquarie Hastings is the example everybody always uses, talking about the sea change, tree change phenomenon. And I think there were some numbers sitting behind this, which I saw as well, which was very interesting. It was one of the few local government areas that had as many people aged, 55 to 64 as there were 65 to 75. There was no, narrowing of the population pyramid. It was just like this, which I had always assumed was probably the result of really high levels of migration from the region, from Sydney, from a whole lot of other places around the state. Julie, do you have anything you wanted to particularly add about sort of some of the challenges and what that means for you as a council?
Thank you, Margaret. Sorry, I should have... One group is those that migrate from Sydney, and they're all cashed up and they buy the big expensive house by the beach, which is great for them. Then we have the long-term residents who live in the country area. Our council area is 3,000 square kilometres. So they live in the little old farm off a little unsealed road, and they're getting to the time now where they might be losing their driver's licence. There's no public transport. They don't get any HACS services because the travel time is too long for HACS services to go out there. And it's taking about 1.5 to 2 years for them to sell that little crusty old farm, and then they can't afford the inflated Sydney prices to live near all the amenities. So that's kind of a big issue for them. So it's another issue is with hospitals. We've got 32% of our population is over 65, and we're trying to get an ageing doctor, a gerontologist, to come. We can only get one day a week to fly in and fly out. And we've tried all the attractors, here's a great house for free rent and here's this and that, with no luck. So we've also got a lot of issues in that way with the medical side of things.
Thanks, that's fantastic. The last place I just kind of thought was putting up, because I think, again, it's a little bit typical of, probably geographically, a very huge part of the state, is some of what's happening west of the Great Divide. So we found some numbers on Walgett, knowing that we have some delegates here today. So, the Walgett, at least on these numbers, the Walgett local government area was expecting a net decline in the total number of people there, but an increase in the number of people who are over 65. Now, I'm sure that's a pretty familiar trend to, lots of people perhaps in smaller areas west of the Great Divide, but obviously is quite a different context to what it is that happens in some of the coastal areas or, what might be happening in Sydney. Do our friends from Walgett have any other great insights that you'd like to throw in for us?
From the point of view of ageing,
there's a microphone coming behind you. Thank you, Margaret.
The percentage of Aboriginal population,
Yep.
and in particular the fact that a lot of those Aboriginal people are looking after their grandchildren, so they're
Yep.
actually in the role of carers.
Yep.
We've basically got three major towns, which are Walgett, Lightning Ridge and Collarenebri, and the demographics in each of those three towns are different. for example, a lot of people wouldn't appreciate that the second most common language spoken in Walgett Shire is Serbian, and because of the number of immigrants that originally came into the Snowy Mountain scheme, and those people have found their way up to Lightning Ridge as opal miners, and so we've got an ageing population of people who have probably pretty poor literacy and numeracy standards, and so they themselves are now moving into that 65 plus age break, and they're looking for additional help in accessing the various services that are available. One of the other issues from Council's point of view is we don't have ready access to a lot of the government agencies and services, and so we're working at the moment with Premiers and Cabinet Department trying to get a proper interagency committee established to address these issues, and things like that are pretty important to the smaller town, and it's not only Walgett, but a lot of those other western towns would have similar problems to what we have.
Absolutely. So look, I mean, that was just a quick Cook's tour, but I guess the point I was trying to make is that, you know, how ageing impacts in different places around the state is going to vary considerably. But it is an issue that I think probably all of us and all councils are going to need to actually think about. Now, look, I think you've probably covered some of these questions already, but I guess this is some of the questions that we were really keen for you to have a think about as you're trying to develop any proposals around projects. To go slightly off script, I guess our thinking in putting some grant money on the table was really trying to help all of you do two things. I'm guessing that most of the people in the room here are people who are already actually have a pretty good sense and understanding about the needs of people who are older. I'm guessing a whole lot of you are doing that work pretty much every day, or at least it's a big part of your job. What we really wanted to do was a couple of things. One was put some money on the table before your council's community strategic plans are due, so that you might actually be able to bring a bit of money to that process and getting people seriously thinking about questions like this. Yeah, really trying to understand what is it that what's going to happen in the next 10 years in your area actually means for your community. So that perhaps a few more people are thinking through what that might mean for the, you know, periodic upgrade of your parks, or the redevelopment of your town centres, or the community facility plan, or who's going to use the pool at 11 a.m. in the morning, or a number of those kind of really quite practical questions, which are going to actually impact on pretty much every aspect of your council's business. The second thing we were trying to do was hopefully ensure that you had a bit of money left over to start work on making that change. And that might be money that you use to cut a deal, to actually talk to your Chamber of Commerce or your local clubs, or, you know, a range of other people who are interested about how is it that we might partner in doing something, you know, that really needs to happen in your local community, and get some momentum behind thinking about how it is we prepare and respond to population ageing. It might be working with the 3 or 4 community organisations that have all the old senior sits halls to kind of work out how it is they might be able to help some of the newer organisations with nowhere to meet. I guess what we were trying to do was, you know, get a strategic and sort of long-term flow on from this, as well as some things that are kind of relevant and can happen now. And I guess they're really just some of the questions that it occurred to me as, you know, James and I were typing this up in the last few days, that you might want to be asking for your community. Now, we know that this didn't all start yesterday when Johnny Come Latelys in the Office for Ageing cracked onto this. Many of you would have been doing work on ageing and ageing strategies and thinking about what ageing means for your communities for some time. And some of you will have already done that work about, you know, how it is that the various bits fit together and knowing what it means for your particular community and locality. And that's great. Let's build on that. If you've got a plan and you know where it's going, well, then let's try and put some money behind helping that plan get implemented. But similarly, there may be others who, you know, and I'm by no means casting aspersions, but perhaps some of those Western Sydney areas that haven't necessarily thought as thoroughly about ageing and its implication for, you know, all of council business, then, you know, maybe that requires a bit more planning effort for the first time. I don't know where all you're at. You're the experts in that, not me. But we wanted to try and design a funding program that was flexible enough to try and help all of you kick along the agenda that I know all of you are having a good crack at. Is that all right? Thoughts, questions at that level? I'm going to get into the technicalities in a minute. Sorry, that people are a bit shell-shocked there. Is that all right? Thank you for the proposals. So look, I think I've probably just said most of this, but let me just, labour it a bit more. That was our aim. We really wanted to support planning and good responses for population ageing in the local government sector. So it's good stuff for what's happening in ageing now, and even better stuff for what's going to happen in the next 10 years. And what that looks like is a bit up to you. Like, we want to leave that open, and as I said, we're not the experts. This can't be a one-size-fits-all process. You know your communities a whole lot better than I can ever hope to. But there might be some planning things you want to do. There might be some whole-of-council approaches to population ageing. We're not obsessive about council ageing strategies. I suspect in many places getting a couple of the right things in the community strategic plan may actually be far better than a standalone ageing strategic plan. But, that's up to you, to work out what works and what's useful for your area. I guess we're having a fairly clear focus on aged-friendly places. Now, you can write that any way you like, and there's all sorts of opportunities around that, but picking up some of that stuff about the built environment, about town centres, about how we use parks, about, community facilities and how that sort of work may happen. I guess I picked up on some of those. We're really keen to see some of this work happen in partnership, because I think that's actually how it is you kind of stretch those dollars a bit further, and really keen to see where we can opportunities for leverage. So, as I said, working with your Chamber of Commerce or clubs, or if there are ways in which, as we get through this process, there are places where our office can help in some of the more whole-of-government bits, and there are some conversations we can help a bit with other government departments, we're very open to kind of trying to do that where that's possible. Here's some of the technical stuff. Now, I'm sure James and Margaret will correct me if I get any of this wrong. Please jump up and down and wave your hands in a vivid manner. This is open to councils or groups of councils. We were happy to put just a bit more money on the table for people to come and work together, because I know often some of this work actually needs to be done, across council boundaries, depending on what part of Sydney you're in or the state you're in. The LGSA are wonderfully and very kindly administering this process for us, and we're very grateful for the work that they are doing. We have about 550 available. All the stuff is online, and I think on your table you have the detailed guidelines. I'm going to step through a few core bits of that, but I didn't think it was, you necessarily needed me to go through chapter and verse, but happy to take specific sort of detail questions if people have them. These were just a few possible examples. I've probably said this 3 times now, but let me, labour through some of them. Some of them might be planning projects. They're just possible examples. A local ageing strategy for the Manly Warringah Council, some specific modelling or some specific engagement, or, particularly trying to audit the accessibility of Borkham Hills for older people using perhaps Catherine's tool or something a bit like it. It may be something a bit more specific around age-friendly places and town centres. Some of you may already have good data on what needs to be done to, make Ballina a better place for older people, and then, that we'd be very happy to kind of support what's been a really good process already. The facilities thing, certainly it's an issue, as I said before, that came up quite a lot in the consultations around the ageing strategy. And I think a lot of that does harken back to the point I was making before about each generation of seniors seems to create their own community organisations and has their own ranges of interests, and how is it that the capital and the hard stuff actually supports that to go on. And look, I think there's some really interesting things that might be possible. These are just possible examples we could think of around IT solutions. So, wayfinding apps to give people, better opportunities to get around the joys of Sutherland or various other places. Please, of course, do not think I have any preconceived issues in any area. It's just random examples I'm thinking of. A few things we don't want to fund, and I think this is probably important to work through as well. We're really not interested in this time. There are other places to do it. We don't really want to be funding festivals, events, short-term programs. We're not, this is, kind of not the place where we want to be doing that. We're looking for stuff which has a more lasting impact than that. Devolved grants, so we're not really wanting to give you money to then go and run a small grants program, with 14 other small community organisations in your area. Again, other places where that can happen, and certainly we point a lot of people to Seniors Week as a place where you can get a bit of cash for that kind of thing. We don't really want to do just pure maintenance of past capital projects. Particularly the kind of ongoing maintenance thing. I know that's always a challenge, but you'll be perhaps unsurprised. It's perhaps not what we wanted to fund with this money at the moment. Again, continuing admin and operational costs of organisations is not really in. Normal salaries, well, we'd prefer not to be, funding that. But of course, if you needed to put someone on a couple of days a week to do some of this work and, enhancing normal salaries, then of course that is fine. We really, I guess this is kind of a point of principle here. This all sits in a framework where what we're trying to achieve is greater participation by older people. So, we're kind of looking for things that are going to help older people now or in the future be more active participants in their local communities. And projects that have already completed / taken place. There's a typo, whoopsie. We don't want to fund something you did yesterday. Hope that's all right. Sorry, that was the nasty bit. We're just about done. Here are the timelines that we're working to. Applications close, as you will know, on the 16th of November, so you've got about another month. But I'm sure many of you have been thinking long and hard about what you might be doing already. We really do want to keep the momentum on this, so we'll try and keep cracking as quickly as we can in terms of getting the assessments done. That will, of course, depend on how many hundreds of applications we get and how wonderful they all are. But that's what we're working to at the moment. We're aiming to let all of you know in December this year, just so that you know before we all go on holidays, frankly, and you can know how this is going to go into your work for early next year. And I guess we're very keen that particularly those projects which have a planning element and are trying to influence the community strategic plan are done in time for that to happen. I mean, as you would know, the CSPs are all due, I think, to go to the Division of Local Government by the end of June. So, if you're going to do extra consults and all that kind of thing, that February, March, April point, I'm assuming, is kind of the sweet spot to give you also time to involve councillors and do all of those other things. Some kind of progress report by 30 July 2013, and that's really just getting a sense about knowing that projects are on track and where it's going and roughly what's being achieved to date, and then projects being completed by the 30th of June 2014. So it gives people about 18 months or a bit under from go to woe. With the obvious acquittals, which are very important, and we of course also need required, back to Migrant and the LGSA in July 2014. I think that is all I have to say on my slides. Open to questions, thoughts, comments, and I may take the right to refer some of these to Margaret and James if I need to.
Just a technical question, but looking at the application form, it doesn't seem to require quotations, which often requires a lot of time on grant writers' part. So you don't require quotations for consultancies or equipment or anything?
Margaret is shaking her head in a knowledgeable way. Great. Absolutely not. No, look, and look, I think these projects are going to be so diverse that, there'll be a time for, well, we certainly did have a discussion about making sure that people follow their normal council procurement processes. I don't actually think we need to be an extra check on what should already be good governance inside councils.
With the implementation side of things, like my council doesn't have an ageing strategy and they've wanted to have one for quite a long time but haven't had the resources to do it. So this is a great opportunity to progress that. Yep. But with the implementation aspect, if you are drawing up a strategy and then you want to do a little bit of implementation, in the application, obviously, it would sort of go against the principle of engaging with the older population if you're going to be sort of dictating what we're going to implement. So is that able to be sort of like a grey area in the application to say, well, we are going to do some implementation, but we're not sure what it will be yet because that will be determined through the engagement process within the ageing strategy?
Look, I think the high-level answer is yes, but, you know, certainly if you're able to have a bit of an indication about where you think it's going to head, that would be useful.
Yep.
And I guess what I'd be, you know, thinking here, this is kind of, I'm happy to let Margaret and James jump in on this one as well, is it'd be interesting to have a think about how will we know that the implementation stuff really is going to happen? Yeah, so it may be it's retreating to a bit of process there and being able to describe, well, you know, because we're doing the engagement in this way and it's being headed by this committee which involves, you know, these 6 local players, we've got a budget which fully commits, I'm making numbers up here, but, you know, 15,000 to get the plan up. It will leave 10,000 and, you know, we really think it would involve 1 or 2 projects, you know, on something. I think that's probably all right. Margaret, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think even if you had an idea of a particular part of your LGA where you thought there might be a need for a particular, like maybe a park or a town centre or something which you thought might be a particular place that needed an ageing focus, you could maybe identify that part or the type of resource or something like that.
Yep. Any other questions, comments? Must be more, there's money on the table, come now. Up the back, excellent.
What happens after the 30th of July or 30th of June 2014?
Indeed. So, look, I guess what we were hoping here is that, as I said, these are projects that we are hoping is built into a lot of the community strategic plans within councils. So this is not just a line. I mean, I think, you know, obviously all of your councils are doing lots of work on the built environment every day of the year, have ongoing plans around what is going on with the capital infrastructure that's happening within your areas. I would hope that the planning bit might actually mean what we're getting is the best possible result for current and future generations of older people in that. So there's bits of sustainability there. That is the other reason we didn't want to fund services and programs, because we really don't want to be doing things that are going to be fabulous for 18 months and then grind to a halt without any clear point of sustainability. Having said that, I mean, really, this is the government trying to put a bit of incentive money on the table to get a result. I think if we can see good results, then, you know, that creates the platform for me to have another conversation with government about how we kind of trigger some of these ongoing programs. So, you know, when I talk to the minister and when the minister goes out there and talks to a whole lot of people, he always talks about the importance, particularly of the built environment in older people's participation. So if we can show that this kind of approach, and this is a good way of strengthening people's hand to, you know, improve the quality of our town centres and built environment, then, you know, that becomes another possibility for what we can do after 2014. Must be some more. In the middle, come on now.
I was thinking of applying for a shuttle bus service for a year, a pilot, but you just said that you won't fund something that's that might need an ongoing...
Look, I think we're really looking at things which are a bit more focused on your planning and on how it is we really prepare and think about the future of population ageing.
Okay.
Now, you know, there may be some places where coordination of some of the transport services that you run will create it within the existing resources, and maybe that's something we look at, but this is really not a program that's going to fund core services. This is not hack enhancement, for instance.
Okay, yeah, gotcha.
Sorry, just to be blunt. There must be more questions. Come now. Up the back.
Hello, it's Diane Page from Mossman Council. I'm the social planner. Just had a question about whether, again, we can use the outcomes from the grant scheme as a way of learning across local government about best practice, the strategies that other councils have developed. So that might be a thought for a further forum or resources from that to gather that information together. More a comment.
That is an excellent idea. We have put a little bit of money aside in addition to the grants program to do, you know, what we generally called sort of communication and stuff. Now, I think that's part of what's funded today, frankly. But I think that's an excellent idea. You know, it is that stuff about what works and how people have done it and how is it you really influence those, you know, people in the engineering department and what are all of those kinds of tactics and issues that you all use that I think we really do need to keep a focus on. Do you have a comment on that one, Margaret?
Yeah, the Division of Local Government has looked at this as a good opportunity to enhance the resource on their web page too. So they're thinking that they could upgrade that resource once they look at the types of projects that have been funded, and it might kind of fall into a few different types of projects which have, you know, a series of case studies that might be useful for other councils. So yes, it's definitely on the agenda. Yeah.
It's partly why we want the progress report too. Just a bit of a sense about where this is going and what it might achieve is a really good way of us being able to talk it up, talk about it, create some imagination for it. You know, it's great things for me to talk about at conferences, for, you know, the minister to use in speeches. I mean, there's an idea under all of this that there are, you know, fantastic ways in which councils can really support older people's participations, and the real life examples you will all generate are incredibly helpful in telling that story. Who else has got something to say? Come on, there must be more. Must be more. No? You're right, Julie, they are shy.
They are very shy lot.
See, it's not my impression of local government.
The councillors that are loud.
But of course. Look, can I just say thank you very much for coming and thank you for your interest. This is really exciting. It's very exciting for me that we can get to a place where there's a whole lot of people out there thinking about how to do some really good, innovative stuff from the grassroots up. It's a really important part of the ageing strategy. We really want to be working with you, and I'm really looking forward to the chance to be having a look at and then working with you on all of your projects. Thanks for your time.